Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Future History Project. And this is the third biography video of Isaac Asimov. Last week we left him basically. He had received his Bachelor of Arts. He had sold, and that was early in 1939. He had sold his first story to Amazing Stories for $64, and he also sold his first story to John W. Campbell, which it was called Ad Astra that he wrote, but John W. Campbell changed it to Trends, and Astounding paid him $69 for that. He also, a year before, he was beginning to write with the help of a typewriter that his father bought him. He began writing letters to Astounding, and he had this grading system for stories. And I'd mentioned that he he hated a story by Clifford Simak called Rule 18. He thought it was very choppy and didn't work because there was no transitional passages between time or scenes. Um, and he wrote that in, like, saying it was awful. And Cliff Simak, because addresses were posted, are printed as well. Clifford Simak sent him a letter and said, "Well, can you elaborate more, basically?" And Simak was a bit astounded by that, and so he reread the story and he realized that he was mistaken. Where he thought it was choppy, Simak had left spaces, and he thought it worked really well. So he sort of ate crow and wrote a letter and saying how wrong he was and how good it was, and then he began thinking that that's the kind of style he would like to write. So, and for the rest of his life, he says he tried to sort of emulate that clear and simple style of writing. But yeah, so um, he's graduated um, uh, he graduated with his BA. He passed, but at the same time, his father was diagnosed with angina, but his father had set on him that he was going to go to medical school. And Simak didn't want to. Asimov did not want to go outside of New York. So, but he had sort of soured on the idea of medical school. One of the main things were that he had to kill a cat and dissect it, and that really soured him for that. But he was a dutiful son, and he applied, and nobody took him. They did not take him anywhere for medical school, so he was quite relieved at that. But while he was doing his BA, he fell in love with chemistry, and so he figured, okay, well, he'll apply for grad school for an MA, but he was turned down, and so that really sort of shocked him, and it sort of because he didn't have the prerequisites for this, because he wasn't expecting to do this at the time. So he talked to his father and everything, and they figured, okay, well, just, he has a couple possibilities, and one of them was to take the prerequisites for one other year. It'll sort of slow him down for another year, and then reapply. But they wouldn't allow him to take that either. So with persistence, though, going back several times, they did allow him in under probation. That if he maintained a B average for the first year, then he could sit the examinations and then see if he can get in. So he accepted that. So again, it would be another year. Um, and also in 1939, just before he was doing all this, or while he was sort of trying to figure out what to do, uh, there was the first so-called World Science Fiction Convention that was uh, that was created and run by Samuel Moskowitz, who actually was part of the science fiction fan group that Asimov had started going to. Unbeknownst to him, they had split, and he was sort of Sam Moskowitz was more of the conservative right wing side of it. The other side, the Futurians that are Futurians that Asimov actually did join with Frederick Pohl, Donald A. Wollheim, and others, were sort of more, I guess, leftists, and wanted to sort of use science fiction to fight fascism because the war had started at this time, and Asimov was very, very conscious of, even all through the 30s, what was happening, in Europe and with Hitler, and especially with the war. So he had no problem with that. But he wanted to go, and Sam Moskowitz were barring the Futurians going in. So they all sort of went up to the doors, and they were refused in. Then they went to a cafe, a little restaurant across the road. But then Asimov was, allowed in. So he actually went in, and on, I think, the second day, um, um, like he met Frank R. Paul, the artist, um, and Forrest Ackerman, and but he felt like a traitor to his friends, the Futurians. But he also he saw Metropolis in one afternoon. He thought it was awful, and I must say, though, by that time it was chopped to bits, so he would never have saw probably a proper copy of it. So that may make a difference, but he did not think much of it. So yeah, and then he was aware of when the war started. He was following the news, so it weighed sort of heavy on him that this was happening. Um, uh, and yeah, and then he was that was like in the summer. He found that he was rejected from grad school, so he spent the summer continuing this. Um, So in September, when September came around, he was accepted under probation. Um, but he needed to pay bills because they were stacking up his bills, and he didn't want to really go to his father to ask for money. And by this time, though, Frederick Pohl began to be editor of Astonishing Stories and Super Science Stories. They were two new bi-monthly magazines, and so quite immediately, Fred Pohl bought two of his stories for half a cent per word, so that helped him out. But but he was still sort of, his father was still hoping that he'd be going to medical school. But as I say, he wanted to stay close as well because his father was diagnosed with angina. But so he started his year of probation in September, and after, like, he's spent 7 years now, sort of very cloistered in a sense, with the boys' school and high school, and then through his BA, there were no girls around, and he occasionally, he met a girl occasionally and went to a film and stuff, but he had no experience with talking or even dating women, uh, and and he figured that it wasn't until his 20th birthday in 1940, as in January 1940, that he had his real first date, and it was a woman named Irene, who was in the chemistry class that he thought she was very smart, and they got along well and continued to sort of see each other for a while. And and uh, Yeah, and well, his name appeared on the cover for the first time for one of his stories, Half Breed, as well. But in March, late March of 1940, uh, Frederick Pohl accepted for Super Science Stories his story Robbie, but it was changed to the name was changed for um, play Playfell or something like that. But it was his first sort of robot story that was published, and we've read that already. But we've read sort of the 1950 sort of version where he added a whole bunch of material to it. So, and then as you know, by this time in March, he passed his probation. So he maintained the marks, and he continued writing throughout 1940. Campbell, he began to see Campbell's sort of uniqueness and quirks regarding stories. Humans always had to be superior to aliens. So to get around this, he started writing like no aliens really in stories, but robots. Well, humans can. He was happy enough with having humans sort of being superior to robots. Um, and he was having trouble with a story. Um, and I've probably mentioned this already, but he was having trouble like getting started. And it says, um, and he said, Campbell basically says they gave him pieces of advice that were worth untold gold. And what he said was, and this is he's quoting Campbell here. Asimov, when you have trouble with the beginning of a story, that is because you are starting in the wrong place, and almost certainly too soon. Pick out a later point in the story and begin again. And so he did, and he's Asimov said he's always done that, and it's always worked for him. Um, and then also a new avenue came up in 1940 was Donald A. Wollheim, another Futurian member, became editor of Sterling Science Fiction and Cosmic Stories. Um, and then also in 1940 was another good year for him writing wise, is because uh, Asimov goes in to see Campbell, and Campbell basically says, "Well, you've got these laws of robotics," and he mentioned them, and it was the first time, sort of he thought of this. So he gives he gives Campbell credit for creating the the um, the three laws of robotics, because but then Campbell always says no, it was Asimov. It was always there in his stories that he was writing, that he was submitting them, but they were just explicit. So now they became explicit. Um, but each one saying it was the other one. And it was later at some point, Randall Garrett had said, it was actually just a fusion of both of them that came up with it, Um, so, and also and then then we sort of move on to um, 1941 now, and he's began his, he passed probation, so he continued, and he needs to do his tests for qualifying in 1941. But before that, uh, uh, he, he went to see Campbell, and Campbell read him a quote, and I'll just have to find it here. Read him a quote of Emerson, and wanted him to write a story on it. Um, yeah, here it is. A quote uh, by Ralph Waldo Emerson called From Nature. In the first chapter, Emerson said, and this is the quote: if the stars should appear one night in 1,000 years, how would men believe and adore? Um, and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God. And Campbell asked him, what do you think would happen, Asimov, if men were to see the stars for the first time in 1,000 years? And Asimov thought, and he said, I don't know. And Campbell said, I think they would go mad. I want you to write a story about that. So, and then they continued to talk a little bit, and he went home, and he began writing a story called Nightfall. And I guess, as you could say, and science fiction history was it began, in a sense. So yeah, and he finished it in April, beginning of April 1941. Campbell asked for a few minor changes, and Willie Lee, the science writer, was around in the office around that time, and he read the story and he thought it was magnificent, and he got 5.5 cents a word for it, but also a quarter cent bonus. So in total, he received $166 for the story Nightfall, and it's more than he ever had. So, and then again in late April, so he had that good news, and then he began his qualifying exams for to get his MA. And but prior to that, I mentioned in the other video too as well. But like the first story that it trends that Campbell bought and put into Astounding wound up in July 1939, and that was the first basically story or magazine that was considered the launch of the golden age. It was the first time that John W. Campbell full force as an editor was throughout the magazine, because prior to that he still had inherited a lot of stuff. So this has been considered the first magazine. So July 1939, and his story shared with Van Vogt's first story, Black Destroyer, which is sort of has been touted as the basis of Aliens, the film. But so that again was Asimov felt that he was sort of a low hitter at the time, with all these luminaries, of science fiction, and it also had I think a Heinlein story in as well. But yeah, so we come back to April 1941. He found out that he passed. That he got his MA, he passed his exams, but not enough to enter postgrad for PhD. He didn't quite make enough. His marks weren't on the exams quite good enough. And then so he went basically. So this is 1941. So he spent another year, taking up some makeup courses and that. And it wasn't until the spring of 1942 that he was able to start. That he had the prerequisites for his PhD. And at this point, he had given up any possibility of going to medical school. And but during this time, he had a conversation with Campbell regarding foundation, because he had an idea. He was going on the subway to see Campbell, and he didn't really have an idea. And I think the book that he had with him was a Gilbert and Sullivan book. But it sort of his mind kind of rambled, and he thought, well, what about an empire? And he loved Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So he had the discussion about this, uh, and he told Campbell, and Campbell thought, well, it's too large a theme for a short story. And Asimov said, I was thinking of a novelette. He said, quickly adjusting his thoughts. And or novelette, it will have to be an open-ended series of stories. What? Asimov sort of said back, and then short stories, novelettes, serials, all fitting into a particular future history involving the fall of the First Galactic Empire, a period of feudalism that follows, and the rise of the Second Galactic Empire. And then again, Asimov said, what? And then Campbell's reply was, yes, I want you to write an outline of the future history. Go home and write an outline. So Asimov went home. He tried an outline, and he couldn't do it. And he just thought he would write the stories, um, and let them fall where they may. And that's what he done, because Heinlein at that point was writing like a very good outline for his future history. But so it was meant to be future history, but Asimov never planned it out specifically. It was ad hoc as it went along, and he started writing the foundation stories. So that's, I think we'll leave it there. That he's got his MA, and it's now 1942. And he will be starting his postgrad, his PhD work in chemistry. And but at this point he'd already he had published what turns out to be, or has been called, the best science fiction story ever read, which is Nightfall. And he's made a lot of money off it, as he says. Um, and It's been up until the point of when he was writing these books. It was been anthologized many, many times. So he was pleased with that. He was surprised because he thinks that there's other stories that he's written that were much better, but he accepts the fact. And he also, when he later in life, when he decided to sort of incorporate a company, it was called Nightfall. Um, when he sort of became a business. So he used the name Nightfall. So yeah, so he still, he it was finding out, again, as I say, the peculiarities of Campbell, where his prejudices are that humans have to be superior to any aliens, and things like that. He wouldn't allow anything like that, and other prejudices that were sort of coming in, as well as Asimov learned more about his style and what he wanted. So yeah, so we'll see it next week, and I hope everybody's enjoying the reading. Take care.